Well, if you're going to be a lawyer, the games industry is not a bad place to have to do it. The full title is there. I'm conscious in a presentation in which I'll be referring to misleading advertisements, that if you came based on the strength of the title that's on the card here, you'd have only seen sweets or cigarettes. So I should disclose this point. I'm not giving away either. If you come expecting that, then you can make your way out quietly. So on we go. There are certain similarities between virtual goods and cigarettes and some obvious differences. When I was talking to someone at King a little while ago, I mentioned I had deleted my copy of Candy Crush from the iPad because it was so addictive. I was quickly corrected to say it isn't addictive, it's highly engaging. But there we are. It just shows the fine distinctions that can sometimes be drawn. So I ask in the blurb for this, was 2014 a pivotal year? I could make a case for it. Because it was a year in which we saw regulators start to publish opinions on the issue of virtual goods and regulation. First off, we had the OFT, the UK regulator, publishing its principles in January of last year. Not to be outdone, the European Commission followed on in July, publishing principles and guidance for platforms. It was a year in which regulators took action against platforms, particularly in the US, imposing some fairly hefty fines. It was a year in which regulators took action against publishers. I've put up 3 there, but there are several others that happened or ongoing at the moment. So you could say it was a fairly pivotal year, and it really hinges around 2 distinct but related points. The first is the whole use of the word free and what that really means in relation to free-to-play games. And the second is the whole issue of exhorting children to make in-app purchases. And as I say, they're distinct but related issues. So I'm going to cover those 2 points and then try and round up to give a sense of what it all might mean. The first point to make is we should not be surprised that the use of the word free is an issue. Free is an incredibly powerful marketing label, as we all know, and long before casual games came along, in fact long before the internet came along, marketers were using this word free, and regulators were therefore looking very carefully about how they did so. And I've just put an extract from the UK Code of Advertising Practice about the whole issue, saying, if something is free, it has to be free, other than the sort of very incremental or minimal costs involved in taking up the offer. Now, at one level, you could say it was an easy issue to solve because platforms, have changed free to get or install. Although one should not underestimate the significance of a platform like Apple making any change at all for anyone unless it really wanted to do so or felt compelled to do so. So simply changing free to get was not a small issue, I guess, for Apple, particularly given the power of the word free. But there is, I would say, a deeper issue with the use of free. It's not just about how a game is described, it seems to be about what a game is really like to play. And got Dungeon Keeper here, where our friend says, occasionally tasks may test your patience. Well, they tested a lot of people's patience because they had to wait around so long to do anything without having to pay money. So the UK Advertising Authority looked at this, and I put the codes there that they looked at, but essentially the point is you can't materially mislead people, you can't hide material information, you must state significant limitations and qualifications. And the regulator said, yeah, okay, we understand that people getting a free-to-play game realize that you're probably going to be offered things to buy. We get that economic model. But this game that we're looking at has the potential to restrict gameplay beyond that which would be expected by consumers. And the ad didn't make it clear. Well, it's quite something if you get a regulator then judging gameplay and saying, at what point does gameplay become so sort of restrictive that it's not really free? And that, as I say, is a bit of a deeper issue than just how the game is labelled at the top line. So moving on to exhorting children to make in-app purchases. The roots of this is a piece of European legislation, Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, been implemented around Europe, prohibits unfair commercial practices. There are 31 of them that are deemed automatically unfair, and one of them is including in advertisement a direct exhortation, they're the words, to children to buy advertised products or persuade parents or adults to do so. So it's children or pester power on their parents. Now, you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with the Runes of Magic case in Germany, where we were encouraged to vamp up our characters, add something to our armor and weapons, and a time-limited offer to upgrade your character. And through a rather sort of torturous legal process, ultimately it was heard that that was a direct exhortation. There's a clear call to action to buy something. It was addressed to children. The court made a lot of this informal language that was used. And there was a hyperlink to an online store where you could actually make that purchase. So it ticked all those boxes, if you like, and therefore fell on the wrong side of the line. But you can ask, so what's meant by children? And you would look in vain for any definition of child. And indeed, there is no consistency about what a child is. Even within the UK, if you look at the advertising codes, they refer to people under the age of 16. In the UK, you can't make a contract unless you're 18 or over, as a general rule. Although if you go north of the borders of Scotland, you can if you're 16. If you look at the data protection regulations, they talk about children being people under 12, and that's just within one or a collection of jurisdictions. If you go beyond that around Europe, you'll get different ages, and Germany sort of 14. So you don't even know what a child is when you're looking at them. And in the Runes of Magic case, the publisher was able to point out that 85% of the players are actually adults. The average player age is 32, but the court said, well, you're still addressing children. Just as an aside, an earlier decision of the same court for Haribo Sweets came to a completely different decision, because that was based on a TV advert with a family, with a famous TV presenter, talking to the family in very child-friendly tones about buying sweets to enter a sweepstake. But that was held not to be addressed to children because you were talking to the whole family. Now, if you can reconcile those two decisions, I'd love to know how you do it. Similarly, a later case to Gameforge just across the border in Austria, but based on the same underlying legislation. It looked at the Disney property Hannah Montana with sort of advertising slogans such as solve puzzles with getting a jump start, get the cool soundtrack. The court said, oh, well, yes, they're describing the kind of things you can do, but not directly exhorting you to do them. Again, if you can reconcile that with the Runes of Magic case, those of you awake will notice that that's not Hannah Montana there, it's a stablemate Mickey Mouse. There's really very difficult to sort of draw the distinction between the two. Both sites had both were linked to a store where you could make a purchase. In one side it was said not to be enough, it to be sort of direct exhortation. On the other, it was. So it's really difficult to square the Gameforge decision, and it just shows some of the difficulties in saying what is a direct exhortation and what isn't. As a general rule, I would say it has to be about a specific product or products. You'd think it would have to include a purchase price and not just the entire product range as a whole. So get this sword for $2.99 would be a direct exhortation, rather than wouldn't it be great to buy some more equipment, would suggest it wouldn't be. And it just shows a sort of rather fine distinction between one or the other. And if you look at the OFT guidance, there's a number of examples it gives about what it would consider falls on one side of the line and what would fall on the other. So cherries are available to buy in the shop would be okay, but you've run out of cherries, buy more now, would not be okay. And then you could say, well, is this an issue that is just confined to children's games? This is an 11-year-old boy whose picture appeared in a number of UK newspapers in 2013, who had managed the incredible feat of spending, I think, £1,800 in Zombies versus Ninjas in the space of 15 minutes, and was one of the things that the OFT picked on to start its investigation in the first place. Well, the first thing is, as I say, we have no definition of what a child is to begin with. The UK guidance refers to games likely to appeal to children. Well, I've got 3 children. One a very keen game player. When he was 10 years old, Call of Duty appealed to him very strongly. So that doesn't get us very far. The UFT does sort of make a few pointers that would suggest a game is likely to appeal to children, like cartoon-like characters, available for anyone to play. If it's not featured if it's featured in the children's section of an app store, then we're more likely to suggest it appeals to children. But the fact that it doesn't feature in the children's section of an app store doesn't mean it isn't going to appeal to children. So hard to draw that line. I think we could have to say it's likely to appeal to children even if it's not just children playing the game. And I think probably you'd say there's no clear cut-off point, there's a sliding scale. And the more the game sort of appears to be directed at children and the younger the child is, then the harsher it will be judged. The UFTs say the younger a child is, the greater the impact of the practices will have. So I think you'd say there's a continuum, and there's no sort of point at which you could say it will be addressed at children or not. So, well may you ask, what does this all mean then? I'm going to try and give you a few sort of practical examples of what you might want to do or not want to do. So the first blindingly obvious thing, don't call something free unless it really is free. Well, as we've seen, platforms have addressed that to some degree, but I think also as a publisher you've got to look at it. And here you've got an example of where a platform is saying install, but the publisher is saying it's all for free. Second is, look at the description of the game. Now, I don't think anyone reads this stuff other than parents and regulators. I've put up 3 examples here, 2 really short ones and 1 really long one. All 3 make the point that it's free to play, but you're going to be offered stuff to buy. Great. The middle one goes on and on. I think it might have been drafted by a lawyer. And it also makes the point that there's waiting time and you might have to pay to get beyond that waiting time. I would, maybe this is yours, so forgive me. I would suggest that you'd have to read that about 3 or 4 times before you really understood what that meant, so it could probably do with being a bit clearer. Avoid aggressive offers. On this one, the price is kind of buried in the corner. You might not notice that. It's supposedly a very exclusive offer. You only get these particular characters with this particular offer. Is that really true? Regulators don't like it if you just make up offers which don't have any justification. It does at least provide you with a clear yes or no button. The fourth thing is, I would tend to avoid caps and exclamation marks. In all the examples I see, people don't seem to like them. It seems to suggest an exhortation, do something now. I'm shouting at you. I'm sort of telling you it's an exhortation, it's a call to action, and regulators don't seem to like that. And it comes up in the UFT examples quite a bit. I say consider age gating. Age gating in this area and in privacy, we all know it's pretty meaningless because children are quite smart. They've seen all these things before. They can work out what sort of date of birth to put in or what age to put in. It does at least show that you're trying to do something. There's no way of verifying someone's age really online, even credit cards that actually don't work. But at least you can say, well, I did try to do something, against which you have to, of course, weigh the friction involved in an age gate, but it might be worth considering depending on the nature of the game. Purchase mechanisms have to make a very clear distinction between when you're spending real money or just in-game stuff, and make sure users know what they're doing. Clearly you want a very attractive, compelling, frictionless monetization model. Equally, you don't want people really spending money when they don't think they're spending money. I would say be careful with delays in play. There are lots of games that have timers and wait times. It's not outlawed, you can do it, but if you result in a very frustrating gameplay experience, then you're going to run into the kind of problems that this chap had. And if there's nothing else you can do while you're waiting, again, that increases the likelihood that you're going to have problems. Whereas if you can play some mini games or do something else, then that reduces that likelihood, I would say. Give users a contact point. All the regulation, all the guidance I've seen published make this point. And if someone's going to complain, better they complain to you than a regulator. The ASA, the UK regulator that looked at the Dungeon Keeper game, did so on the basis of 1 complaint. Because, of course, a regulator applies some sort of leverage methodology to complaints, and 1 complaint equals, I don't know, 500 unhappy people. So they can take action on a very, very sort of small number of complaints. So I come back to my question, virtual goods, sweets or cigarettes or something in between? Well, possibly something in between. I've put here that virtual goods are moderately regulated. I think they'll become potentially increasingly highly regulated. So over the next 12 months, I think we could probably say that we'll likely to see some enforcement action in the UK. We've talked to the UK regulator. They say that on the back of their principles, they've gone back, they've looked at every game that they looked at when coming up with the principles. They say a lot of progress has been made, but there are still some that they don't think quite match up to what should be done. We'll see continued scrutiny by the advertising regulator in the ASA. Germany, of course, is a very active regulator when it comes to this kind of thing. And there's already action going on in Italy from the advertising regulator, and we'll probably see more in other European jurisdictions. We'll also probably see more work from the platforms, and in a sense there's more to be concerned about what they do than even the regulators, because they have a very direct way of imposing their way on what we do. So a few final thoughts. Well, it's clearly not the end of free-to-play, is the first obvious point. I would say the gradient is getting increasingly steep for children's games, and by that I mean games clearly focused and targeted at younger children. I think that's going to become an increasingly difficult area in which to make money. The obvious aim is just don't be the least compliant. Regulators don't like to lose. They don't tend to take action unless they're pretty confident that they're going to win. So they're going to pick the worst possible example to come after. It's the sort of herd of wildebeest being chased by the lion. The lion's going to pick the one that's lame and is lagging behind the rest, because that's the easy kill. So as long as you make sure you're not that wildebeest and somewhere in the middle of the pack, then chances are you might be okay. However, if you become very successful, then you become an attractive target. But there's nothing really you can do about that, and that's not a bad place to be. Anyway, that's all I was going to cover in my time. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to try to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Do we have any questions for Paul? We have one right over there.
Hi. When it comes to, let's say, Facebook posts, where one is making some kind of offer that's happening inside of a game, although it might be intended for, let's say, a US audience, if it's made available to worldwide, is this something that some governments would pick and choose, like even if it wasn't intended for the Spanish audience in particular, someone from Spain could read that, and then someone jumps on board to say, hey, you're trying to market to something that's outside the regulatory market. I mean, between the US and Europe, there's obviously quite a bit of a difference in how they look at it. Is there a way to avoid that kind of confusion without having to specifically target every country with your posts, do you think?
Regulators will look at the effect it has on the people within their sort of jurisdiction. So theoretically, at least, a regulator in Spain, to use your example, could look at that and say this is being addressed to an audience which includes Spanish people. Therefore, we're interested. In practical terms, unless you've actually made a sort of more focused and targeted effort at reaching the Spanish audience in your example, it is probably unlikely that they will do anything about it, is the answer.
Okay. And as one follow-up, when it comes to privacy for the ages, the governments don't like to let you share the personal information between the user and the platform. However, certainly it would make things easier if the platform knew the age of the person so that they could make all efforts to avoid marketing to some children. Our company has a social casino product where we try very hard not to promote this game to people under the age of 21 in any country, but certain advertising platforms don't have the age knowledge of who's actually seeing the game at any given time. Plus, when you're registering your iPad or your iPhone, typically the person who does it is over the age of 21 or has some kind of credit card, which an 11-year-old does not have. Do you see there being some kind of information exchange or allowance, I guess, to identify a person to help them avoid the situation?
It's clearly a really difficult issue, and I think there are a number of initiatives to try to address that problem, but I think we're still some way away from solving it. I think, in a way, as you say, all you can do is all you can do. So you as a publisher take all the action that you can to make sure that only the people over the right age are engaging with your offering. But beyond that, what can you do? At least you've shown you can made reasonable steps.
Any other follow-on questions? I had one for you, actually, Paul. How's the regulation in China and Asia and other countries in the East compared to the West?
Oh, you're asking that of an English lawyer. Somewhat less regulated, I would say, in general terms. As far as I know, the regulators there have been less active about this particular issue than they have about other content issues.
Okay, thank you. If that's all, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.